Welcome to our 8th episode of One Work, 5 Questions with Dr. M. Andrew Holowchak and your host, Donna Vitek. Thank you for joining us today, Farmer Holowchak.
That's it. I just got off my plantation, just checking up my plantation. I've grown taters, onions, corn, all sorts of beets. Onions got to grow, and carrots.
Oh, wow.
And working the land with my little dog. You can see in the background there, Jefferson. He works the land. I do the labor, and he just sort of sits around. So we work as a team.
He sits around looking cute.
Yeah, he's good at that.
Oh, Dr. Holowchak is the world's foremost scholar on Thomas Jefferson. He has studied his work and written over 100 essays and over 20 published books on Thomas Jefferson. And you'll be able to find all of his work in the video description. With our show, One Work, 5 Questions, I'll ask Dr. Holowchak 5 questions on one work of Thomas Jefferson's. Our 8th topic today is on Thomas Jefferson's views on husbandry in Query 19 from the Notes on Virginia. Are you ready, Dr. Holowchak?
As ready as I can be.
Okay. So first, I'm going to give our audience an introduction on the topic, and I'll also include Query 19 in the video description as well. Thomas Jefferson had an especial affection for the life of a farmer. You have said in numerous publications, Dutiful Correspondent, Thomas Jefferson Moralist, Jefferson's Political Philosophy, and the Metaphysics of Utopia, Psychobiography of an American Lion, and The Cavernous Mind of Thomas Jefferson, as well as in many papers. He writes about the life of the husbandman as a sort of idyllic ideal, and yet Jefferson himself was not a farmer. At least as a farmer, he farmed most of his life from a distance. In short, he wrote so often of his love of farming, while he spent his time doing law, politics, and science, among other things. So it seemed we have much to talk about today with Thomas Jefferson and farming. On this episode, One Work, 5 Questions, we examine Thomas Jefferson's love of husbandry. The focus here is, again, Jefferson's Notes on Virginia, Query 19, where he aims to offer an account of husbandry in Virginia. And you're in Virginia.
Sure am. Got my farmer overalls on and ready to rock right here.
Yeah. If you have ready access to Thomas Jefferson's Notes on Virginia, we invite you to turn to Query 19 and follow our discussion. Okay, are you ready for question number 1?
Let's go.
Okay. Question number 1, Query 19, titled Manufactures, is a reply to Francois Barbé Marbois' question concerning manufactures, commerce, and interior and exterior trade. What does Jefferson say concerning the state of Virginian manufacture?
Well, here I can best answer just by reading from the first paragraph of his Notes on Virginia. He said, "We never had an interior trade of any importance. Our exterior commerce has suffered very much from the beginning of the present contest," meaning the Revolution. "During this time, we have manufactured within our families the most necessary articles of clothing. In other words, we spun our own clothes, self-sufficient. Those of cotton will bear some comparison with the kinds of manufacture in Europe. In other words, we create cotton goods that rival to some extent the goods of Europe. But those of wool, flax, and hemp are very coarse, unsightly, and unpleasant." So here we're deficient. "And such is our attachment to agriculture and such our preference for foreign manufactures that it be wise or unwise, our people will certainly return as soon as they can to the raising raw materials and exchange them for finer manufactures than are able to execute themselves." So what he tells us here is that, we are in a rough stage. We farm our goods and we can do cotton, items of clothing sufficiently well, but when it comes to other sorts of things, we lag behind Europe. So we do have to, in some sense, import a number of our goods from Europe. at this extent. So, I mean, that's what's going on with respect to Virginian manufacture.
Oh, okay, okay. Question number 2. Jefferson then cascades to a relatively lengthy exposition on the state of husbandry manufacturing in America in contrast to that of Europe. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. To preface, one thing I say, he's asked to talk about what goes on in Virginia, and he's not talking just about the state of manufacture in Virginia, as he does in many of the queries. How you doing, Jeff? As he does in many of the queries, he doesn't limit himself to just what goes on in Virginia. He's talking about the state of manufacturing things in all of colonial America at the time. So he says, the political economist of Europe has established it as a principle. Here's the principle. Every state should endeavor to manufacture for itself. And he says, we transfer this principle to America without question. So it seems reasonable, with the qualification that the difference of circumstance should often produce a difference of results. Now he goes on to say, the problem with European agriculture and manufacture as well is that they're forced to manufacture goods because they're sort of landlocked. They don't have enough arable land. They don't have enough land available for farming. And for example, like in France, the land that is available is sometimes being wasted by the wealthy people to be used as hunting grounds and so forth for, fox hunting and things like that. Jefferson lamented when he was in Paris that so much of the land could be used for farming, yet it's not. It's being put to waste. So the condition, the difference of circumstance of which he speaks is that in Europe, conditions for great agricultural yield are just not there, while in America we have an abundance of land and we have not enough people to farm. So the idea is he's got this agrarian ideal. He wants the country to be mostly agrarian, and he wants the citizens to turn to farming, to husbandry. And the ideal here is that something to the effect that, at least half of our citizens should be called to the discipline of husbandry. His ideal would be, he'd like to see all of America turn to farming. We can farm goods, make ourselves self-sufficient with farming, export our surplus of goods to Europe. So that's, what goes on is that America has the advantage of land, though not enough people to do all the farming, but the prospect for being able to farm goods, not only for our own use, but for the use of people in Europe are quite good.
If he only saw our society today and our food shortages.
The chemicals thrown, the large scale husbandry that goes on where the small farms are ground out, the chemicals thrown in the ground, I think he would be sort of disgusted by the practice today.
How it has changed so much. Okay, question number 3. Jefferson then turns to what you often call a paean to husbandry in a series of arguments to show the preferability of agriculture to manufacturing in America. Can you say something about those arguments?
I can, for those who don't know what the word paean is, P-A-E-A-N. It's sort of like a song of praise. And I say that in my works because he speaks so eloquently and so often about the beauty of the agricultural lifestyle. So I think we find in query 19, in other words, we get a large number of arguments, but he gives us a good 4 different arguments. This whole notion of the agricultural ideal, I need to say why it's paean, is in large part due, or at least in some part due to his assimilation of the utopian literature of his day. That's been wholly neglected. I talk about Jefferson's debt to the utopian literature in my book on Jefferson's political philosophy and his metaphysics of utopia. which you obviously read from cover to cover, right?
Yeah. Yesterday.
I couldn't even read the title, didn't understand the title. Metaphysics of Utopia. Anyway, the idea is he's following people like More's Utopia, Louis Sebastian Mercier's The Year 2440, Harrington's Oceana, Comte de Volney's The Ruins and Condorcet's History. And, you know, all these people talking about sort of an idyllic or future society, envisaged future society where most of the laborers are turned to farming. That's really what people really need to do. It's only because we have a desire for fripperies and gewgaws and unneeded goods, in other words. We import so many silly things, and today it's much worse than it was in Jefferson's day. So the first argument he gives is what I call the argument from means. He says, we have an immensity of land courting the industry of the husbandman. It is best then that all our citizens should be employed, and its improvement or one half should be carried off to do manufacture. So in other words, the first argument is that we have the land, we have the resources. Let's use the land to its fullest capacity. So that's the argument from means. We can use what we have to fullest capacity. Second argument I call the argument from means. The argument from virtue. And he says, those who labor the earth are the chosen people of God. Look at this language. That's why Pian. If ever he had a chosen people whose breasts he has made his particular deposit for substantial and genuine virtue. It is the focus in which he keeps alive that sacred fire which otherwise might escape from the face of the earth. Corruption of morals in the mass of cultivators is a phenomenon of which no age nor nation has furnished an example. You know, so he talks about, so we got, these are people who, you know, he says, look to the heavens for their own industry. So the idea is that you want to come up, Jeff? Jeff, you want to come up, say hello to the people? There you go.
Hi, Jeffy.
Yeah, he's my fellow laborer on my big plantation. And anyways, so that's the second argument. Third argument is an argument I call from caprice. He says, it is the mark set on those who are not looking up to heaven, to their own soil and industry, as does the husbandman, for subsistence, depend for it on the casualties and caprice of customers. Dependence begets subservience and venality, suffocates the germ of virtue, and prepares fit tools for the designs of ambition. So in other words, he tends to think farmers, you know, it's a sort of strange argument. These farmers he thinks are independent. They grow their own thing, and the only thing they're dependent on is good weather, enough rain, not too much rain, sunshine and things. Manufacturers are, you know, it's the argument from caprice because they're dependent on customers. If I have a good, especially a good that's not needed, I have to market it. And the way to market it, and if people no longer want that product, if the market gets full or people are not interested anymore in the product, I'm in tough shape. So that's the argument from caprice. And lastly, he gives what I call the argument from urban decay. He says, right at the end, the last three sentences, the mobs of great cities add just so much to the support of pure government as swords do to the strength of the human body. It is the manners and spirit of a people which preserve a republic in vigor. A degeneracy in these is a canker which soon eats at the heart of its laws and constitution. So Jefferson was consistently and always anti-city. He thought cities were unhealthy. Manufacture is what develops these cities. And with manufacture, as you'd see in England during this time, you see whoring, drinking, gambling, women and children working in vile, filthy conditions in factories just to produce the sort of goods that no one needs. I'll read something else that's not in here. I put it on the side. I have it on my computer. He writes to Benjamin Austin in 1816. That's the year we're going to be focusing on next time. Agriculture is productive, manufacture is sterile, and it is nature that makes this so. The labor of the husbandman, a vast addition is made by the spontaneous energy of the earth on which it is employed. For 1 grain of wheat committed to the earth, she renders 20, 30, and even 50-fold, whereas to the labor of the manufacturer, nothing is added. So you can call this the argument from cornucopia. It is a, it's a very simple argument to understand. You put a seed in, and maybe 1 tomato seed, and you cultivate it pretty well. And what you get is a plant that yields how many tomatoes and then how many seeds. So nature is cornucopia. It's not the case with manufacture. Manufacture is sterile. So that's an argument that is somewhat similar to the other 4 arguments that we've given. So this argument, and the strange thing about the cornucopian argument is that he doesn't factor in the fickleness of nature, drought, flooding, and well, we'll talk about him as a farmer. So, I mean, it's not that farming was all that easy. You had the rocky and red soil in Virginia too. So, problems.
Okay. Maybe I wonder if that contributed to his lack of participation in farming.
Well, not really.
Oh, okay. Really. Question number 4. I'll stick to the script.
No, that's fine. I mean, we'll talk about this. One of the other questions is asked.
Okay. Question number 4. With such praise for husbandry, why didn't Jefferson merely oversee his plantation instead of become a lawyer, politician, and amateur scientist?
Well, science was his love. And he says in numerous letters, and that if he had his choice, he would be a scientist, not a politician or lawyer. He was a lawyer early on, switched to politics, and as a politician, he didn't really like politics either. A lot of people just say he's being, now we got my cat whining, he's being hypocritical in saying that he doesn't like politics. I don't think so. I will read to you a letter to George Washington when Washington asks him to be his Secretary of State. And I take Jefferson very seriously when he says he disliked politics. He really did. But he was good at it, and there was a revolution going on early on. And then post the revolution, when the revolution was successful, there's a country to start. And he realized that he was sufficiently talented and one of the most important people to start helping, found the country. So I'll answer that by reading to you a letter that I take very seriously and literally. It's a letter to George Washington, December 15, 1789. It is not for an individual to choose his post. You, Washington, are to marshal us as may best be for the public good, and it is only in a case of its being indifferent to you that I would avail myself of the option you have so kindly offered in your letter. If you think it better to transfer me to another post, my inclination must be no obstacle, nor shall it be if there is any desire to suppress the office I now hold, or to reduce its grade. I won't read the rest of it. The idea is, it's Jefferson, I'd rather go back to France than be Secretary of State and all that. But he says, you choose. And he's not being lazy here, that he's wishy-washy, can't make up his mind. He doesn't want to be in the cabinet. He wants to go back to France. But if in the in Washington's mind, if Jefferson could be put to better use as part of his cabinet as Secretary of State, Jefferson says, then just do so and I will follow your lead. Says that in several other places. I take it very seriously. He disliked politics, but he would sacrifice his, and this, another argument that makes my blood boil, that people talk about his selfishness, his racism, his hypocrisy. Here's a person that's sacrificing his life. He's going against his own inclinations to try to be of service to to the fledgling country. You know, it says a lot about the person, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does. The sacrifice that he made, his own personal happiness, not to mention his wife. He had to think about her as well. So
yeah, that's you bring up a good point. You know, he had a wife, and you know, his wife dies in 1782, just after his governorship ends, and you know, that certainly had to think often that, you know, I spent my whole life, you know, in the Congress and the Virginia House of Delegates and as governor and everything, and in doing that, I put at risk not only my life, but the life of my wife and my daughter. And, you know, and I've not given her much of a life in sacrifice. We don't know, you know, I'm trying to answer the question. We don't know what his wife said. His wife could have been encouraging on, please do that, help, you know, or she could have been, you know, rather disinclined for him to continue. We just don't know.
All right. So anyway, it was a huge personal sacrifice for him to make, to spend his life, a good portion of his life, serving our country.
And his state, and you know, and then, you know, as minister to France later on after the death of his wife, he's serving the interests not only of our country but of France. And there's a sort of international community in which he enters, and so he's a global spokesperson. So he's, you know, working for the interests of the whole world in some sense.
Well, and we know that George Washington, referring back to the letter, that he was asked to be Secretary of State, and then we know he did go on to become president. So he didn't serve his time as Secretary of State and then leave. He ended up staying, and
he was vice president after, you know, he ran for presidency, not by his own inclination, against John Adams, and he was relieved when Adams won. That he thought that Adams deserved, he was a senior statesman, he deserved the presidency, and he sort of wanted the vice presidency in some sense, because, I hate to say this, there's nothing to do. He could spend a lot of time back home at Monticello, and he had to preside over the Senate, but other than that, when the Senate's not meeting and so forth, there's not a lot for him to, didn't have to do much. He got a salary for doing not too much.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much of a story here for one person. Question number 5. Finally, Jefferson returned to overseeing his plantation at Monticello after retirement from the presidency. Was he a good farmer, and did he enjoy himself as a farmer?
That's a tough, you answer that, Jeff. Did you enjoy farming? He knows the camera's on, he's got to get in. Oh. He was a terrible farmer.
Oh,
a terrible farmer. I would say, you know, he talked about his love of the agricultural lifestyle, song of praise. You know, they're the closest people to God that you can find, but, you know, he wasn't much of a farmer. Now, he had 2 retirements, you know, the one when he got back from France, and he goes to Monticello, and he's talking about, the first one I should say, after his stint in Washington's cabinet, 1794, that's what I meant to say. 1794, he retires, he quits, you know, his role as Secretary of State, and he goes back to Monticello. And I have some quotes. The one to John Adams, 1794. I returned to farming with an ardor which I scarcely knew in my youth, which has got the better entirely of my love of study. So he's claiming that not only is he's so much enthralled by, ensorcelled by farming, the life of the farmer, that he doesn't care about study. Now, do you buy that? No. He writes in 1795 to William Branch, who's a Virginian senator, if you visit me as a farmer, it must be as a co-disciple. I am as much delighted and occupied with it as if I was the greatest adept. I shall talk with you about it from morning till night and put you on very short allowance as to political aliment being foodstuffs and so forth. And then to Charles Wilson Peel, after he retires from the presidency, he writes in 1811, No occupation is so delightful to me as the culture of the earth, and no culture comparable to that of the garden. Such a variety of subjects, someone always coming to perfection, the failure of one thing repaired by the succession of another, instead of one harvest, a continued one through the year. So, you got these real magnanimous and beautiful sentiments about the life of the husbandman. And he's talking about as a gardener. Well, you plan your garden out so that something, when things, the tulips die off, and the crocuses die down, the bulb plants early in the spring, you get later on, late in the season, I'll have my sunflowers coming up. Boy, personally, I'm going to have a large sunflower garden. I bought a bunch of different sorts of seeds, brown, purple, blue sunflowers coming in, the likes of what you'll never see. So I share, I understand this. I share his ardency. Am I a good farmer? No. And it's by the fact that I just toured my plantation. I'm not a good farmer because I'm too interested in intellectual pursuits. I should add a couple things. He owned Lord Kames' book, The Gentleman Farmer. And I say Jefferson was a bad farmer because he was farming, as I told you before, and as you mentioned in your intro, right? He farms from a distance. If I'm the governor, or if I'm vice president or president and I'm away from Monticello, I entirely have to depend upon overseers to do everything the right way. When he comes back from the presidency, his farmed lands are completely worthless at the time. The overseers have not taken care of it. He says it's going to take a couple of years just to get it back where it's fruitful. Everything was so badly mismanaged. So Kames and his gentleman farmer, the aristocratic farmer, talks both about the practical aspects of farming and the theoretical aspects of farming. And Kames says agriculture, farming in general, justly claims to be the chief of the arts. It enjoys, besides the signal preeminence of combining deep philosophy with useful practice. So it has the claim to being the greatest of the fine arts, oratory, rhetoric, poetry, architecture, music, and things like that. Farming. No one thinks of farming as a fine art because fine art is fine because it's not useful, because it's beautiful. Farming, has a yield, but Kames says, it's beautiful as well.
As we can see here in the pictures of Monticello.
Yeah, you got some nice pictures up there. You can see his, in the fifth picture down middle, that's in the sixth picture, those are his walkways. He had 4 different walkways around Monticello, and third picture as well. He called them roundabouts. Wasn't there a rock song? Yes, did the roundabout.
Yeah.
And then you got in the first 3 picture his vegetable gardens. They were 1,000 feet long and 90 feet wide or something like that. I may be wrong on that. But around the walkways, you notice how he's got tulips growing at this time. Obviously, this is clearly early in the spring because of the tulips. Of course, you knew that, right?
Yeah.
Teasing you. So, he always, at Monticello, people do a great job of trying to reconstruct the flower gardens and the pleasure gardens, as they're called. In the fourth picture, you see the grapes growing. He had a vineyard. He made his own wine and he made his own beer.
Oh, wow. Over here. Okay.
Yeah. Wow. The fourth picture, lower left. And I should state, let me read something from Charles Wilson Peale in 1813. Like everything Jefferson approached, he had to be a looker on, a scientist. Every mathematics always comes into play, algorithms, formulas, shapes, patterns from geometry, calculations, equations. Listen to what he writes about. This is why he was a bad farmer, because his farming he got from books. He wasn't around Monticello where he could practice. So he'd read books, talk to neighbors, and then use what the idea was he'd work things out on a sheet of paper. And when he worked it out on paper, he expected it to work out in practice. And he did actually design a plow mold board, starting from a right angle here, and you'd gradually curve it using the principles of calculus, the integral principles of calculus, so that you had a not a sharp cut into the earth, but an easy cut into the earth, cutting only so much as you need to cut, and it worked. It is very efficient. He won an award for that. That's one of the things he worked up on paper using, a right angle in the calculus that works beautifully, but he tried to do that with everything and it didn't work. Here's a quote from Charles Wilson Peale, to Charles Wilson Peale.
Okay.
The true medium may really be considered and stated as a mathematical problem. This is math. Right? Given the quantum of labor within our command and land ad libitum, offering its spontaneous contributions, required the proportion in which these two elements should be employed to produce a maximum, right? So we have land and labor. It's a difficult problem, varying probably in every country according to the relative value of land and labor. The spontaneous energies of the earth are a gift of nature, but they require the labor of man to direct their operation. And the question is, so to husband his labor as to turn the greatest quantity of this useful action of the earth to his benefit. The question he's arguing here is the challenge for the farmer is to get the greatest yield. And Jefferson calls this a mathematical problem. He's working it out on paper. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a sensible thing. But the idea is that the mathematical problem has to relate to reality straightforwardly. And if there's no yield in the equation, then this whole approach just doesn't work. I'll just say before ending to end that in his dotage, he acknowledged to his grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, he loved him dearly. He gave the management of his agriculture, his estate. Everything was thrown into the hands of his more than able grandson. And he admitted, he says, I've just always been a bad farmer. So why don't you take it over?
Oh, so that was nice. He passed it on to the next generation.
Well, a couple generations down. His wife's husband was at the time probably drinking heavily and not close to the family. He withdrew from the family. It's complicated. We'll have to do something on that.
Oh, it sounds like we have some future episodes here.
There is an inexhaustible supply of episodes, as one can imagine. I've written 20 books, as you know, that I'm working on more. There are more that are done that'll be published soon. And there's just, if I have the will and the energy, I could do 20 more if I wanted to. So large was the field of his interests. And so deep was his understanding of things. You can write a book on Jefferson and poetry, Jefferson, the mathematician. That's never been done. But just like I said, everything he looked at, he sort of made into a mathematical problem.
Yeah.
Strange fellow, is it not?
Very interesting person.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yes, fascinating.
Tells you why, in spite of my, farmer coveralls here, I'm a decent farmer, but I spend too much time doing stuff like this and not watching my beets or watering them when they need water all the time. So,
well, we won't hold you up any longer. We'll let you go water your beets.
Thank you. Gotta go tend to the plantation.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Holowchak. I appreciate you sharing your expertise on Thomas Jefferson with us and helping us to learn more about this wonderful person who has contributed so much to our country. What would we do without him?
I agree. Before we close, I want to say I agree with Thomas Jefferson that husbandmen and husbandwomen, we should say today, farmers are the chosen people of God in some sense. What a wonderful profession to grow, not only for yourself, for other people. And, and another thing we didn't mention here, my digging in and involvement with the land made me the best patriot right? Why do you think the Ukrainians are fighting so hard? It's their land, their farm fields, and their houses. It's their land. When I know intimately a piece of land, you're not going to take it from me. I'll fight for it. So farmers, a manufacturer in his factory, if something happens, he can move his manufacturing business to another state, another place. He doesn't care so much. He won't, but the farmer knows his land. It takes him years just to know what grows, what doesn't grow, how to manure it, whatever. He'll fight for his country.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a personal investment.
And a political angle to it. He thinks, a nation of, look, it doesn't say it in Query 19, but a nation of farmers is, in his mind, and I think he's right, a nation of patriots. Would you think that makes sense?
Yes.
In a fight for the country.
It certainly does. Well, we can't live without food. We need to be able.
The land. If I'm a business person and things don't work, I can move my business out of America. I don't give it a country necessarily.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen. If you'd like to contact Dr. Holowchak or
Jeffy,
you can reach him at mholowchak@hotmail.com. He's available for conferences. And also on his Facebook page, Thomas Jefferson, Bring Him Home to Monticello, Citizens for Change. And our next episode, episode number 9, will be a letter to Samuel Kercheval on Thomas Jefferson's political philosophy. Ooh, dated July 12th, 1816. So I'm excited to talk about that and to learn more about Thomas Jefferson's political philosophy. If you enjoyed the video today, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel on on YouTube. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us.
Good job, Don, as usual. Thank you for a wonderful interview. Look forward to next week when we do very, 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 I underscore very important letter. Because if you want to understand Jefferson's political philosophy, everything's in that. And then I'll add as an inducement for people to watch next week, something mysteriously happens in the year 1816 that affects not only Jefferson, where Jefferson in 3, if not more letters, investigates the notion of Republican government in a manner he never does. He analyzes it to death in letters, but it affects people all over the world.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, you've definitely got my interest.
Next week to find out what happens in the year 1816 that changes the world.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you hear that? You have to tune in next week for episode number 9 to find out the surprise that Dr. Holowchak has for us. Thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful day.